One Sunday morning, my mother's friend, whom I called Aunt Helen, came to visit us. Aunt Helen was an older woman, but no less pretty. She had black hair, a medium build, and an oval face. Her skin was smooth and she had a warmth about her that made her quite charming. She had a natural grace that seemed to be effortlessly achieved, and when she smiled, the whole room seemed to light up. That's exactly how I can describe her. I didn't take English lessons, but she was pretty good at it. I had my own difficulties with the language, and she often helped me with that, which made her visits both exciting and nerve-wracking for me. Aunt Helen was patient and always found a way to make learning enjoyable, even if I was embarrassed by my mistakes. She seemed to genuinely care about my progress, and that meant a lot to me. Aunt Helen and my mom talked for quite a while, and, I must say, quite loudly. Aunt Helen always had a confident voice that carried throughout the room. They chatted and laughed, and seemed to have learned a lot. It felt like they shared many memories, and their laughter was infectious. Although I was not part of the conversation, I could feel the joy they shared. As she was about to say goodbye, Aunt Helen turned to me and asked, "Liam, you're coming to my class today, aren't you?" I nodded affirmatively, feeling a little nervous. Aunt Helen always had a way of making me feel both excited and a little anxious at the same time. "Great. We have one of our most important lessons today," she said with a smile. She was a little playful. She always had this weird way of talking to me, even from the very first class. My mom just laughed at her behavior. She seemed to be amused by the way Aunt Helen treated me. There was something about Aunt Helen's playful nature that made me feel like she was telling me a secret that only the two of us knew. In the afternoon of that day, I went to her house. It was a cozy little apartment. I felt like it was filled with little treasures and memories that gave it a special mood. On the shelves were old photos, trinkets from her travels, and books, each of which seemed to tell its own story. "Come in, Liam. Sit down and have a seat," she said warmly as she led me into the living room. The living room had a glass coffee table and a white leather couch that I already remembered from previous visits. On the wall hung several paintings of landscapes that added to the room's tranquility. One painting of a meadow always caught my eye. It was bright and full of life, and I often caught myself looking at it while Aunt Helen explained the rules of grammar to me. We sat down at the table and Aunt Helen handed me a notebook and several sheets of paper to begin our study. The papers were filled with exercises, and in the margins Aunt Helen made notes, little reminders and tips that were supposed to help me understand better. As we worked, I began to notice something strange again. Aunt Helen was looking at me with a smile, her eyes lingering on me in some unusual way. She would touch my arm or shoulder in some unnatural way, and it made me feel uncomfortable. I began to suspect something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. The touches were brief, but they lingered in my mind, preventing me from concentrating on the exercises. Then, as we were sorting out one exercise, she suddenly stopped and looked at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she was considering something. "Do you really want to know? Do you want me to tell you straight?" she asked, her voice softer, almost teasing. The tone made me wary, but I nodded and agreed, though I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. There was something in her eyes, in the way they seemed to be studying mine, and I felt like I was being tested in some way. "Have you ever had a girlfriend, Liam?" she asked, looking at me intently. I turned my head to the side, feeling awkward. That simple gesture meant that I hadn't had anything with anyone, and she seemed to realize that. I felt my face heat up, and I wanted to just disappear in that moment. "But you don't know how hard it is without male pleasure," she continued, her voice sounding almost wistful. "All the energy goes somewhere, so I just wanted you to know. Someday you'll realize that." She sounded like she was trying to share some deep truth, but her words made me feel even more uncomfortable. Her tone was soft, but there was something unsettling in the way she spoke, like she was trying to bridge a gap that shouldn't be crossed. Her words made me uncomfortable, and I didn't know how to react. I shifted in my seat, trying to focus on the notebook in front of me. At this point, everything happened very quickly, and I don't remember what happened very well. My brain seemed to shut down for a while, and when it came back on, I found myself sitting next to a cheerful Aunt Helen. She was looking at me, her eyes bright, as if nothing had happened. Her smile was warm, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something had changed. "Did you like the story?" she asked, her voice becoming playful again. A glint appeared in her eyes as if she was expecting some kind of reaction from me, something more than just an answer. I wasn't sure what to answer. I hesitantly nodded, my mind still trying to piece together what had just happened. Aunt Helen smiled at me and patted my shoulder as if to reassure me. She started talking about our next class, but my thoughts were somewhere else. I was still trying to make sense of it all. There was something unsettling about it all that I couldn't shake off. But Aunt Helen acted as if everything was perfectly normal, and I nodded, not knowing what else to do. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door, placing her hand lightly on my back. "I'll see you next week, Liam," she said cheerfully. I smiled weakly at her, still feeling confused and anxious. As I left, I couldn't help but think about the strange moments we had shared that day. There was something about Aunt Helen that I couldn't understand, a mystery that lingered in my mind long after I left her apartment. That night, I tried to focus on other things: homework, the book one was reading, anything to take my mind off what had happened. But my thoughts kept coming back to Aunt Helen. The way she spoke, what she said, the way her hand rested on my arm, it was like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't put together. I replayed all these conversations in my head, wondering if I had misinterpreted something, if I had overthought something. The next morning I mentioned Aunt Helen's visit in passing, trying to gauge her reaction. Mom smiled, clearly loving her friend, and said, "Helen has always been such a free spirit. She wants what's best for her, Liam." I nodded, but her words didn't do much to ease the anxiety that still weighed heavily in my chest. Some part of me wanted to tell my mom everything, but I held back. I didn't know how to explain it, lest I seemed confused and make Aunt Helen seem like someone she wasn't. Or maybe, I thought, I was just imagining things. I had been busy all week, but Aunt Helen's words echoed in my head. I couldn't help but wonder what she meant, what she wanted me to understand. The restlessness wouldn't leave me. And even when I was with my friends, laughing and joking, some part of me felt detached, preoccupied with thoughts of Aunt Helen and the strange experience we shared. It was like a door had opened to something I wasn't prepared to face, and I didn't know how to close it.